What is mind/consciousness? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. What is mind/consciousness? People sort of use the terms interchangeably. The standard definition of it says that they're synonymous, and it's one of, again, the fundamental topics of inquiry in philosophy. So, mind, consciousness. Let's just start with like the normal breakdown of it. Standard definition is basically that mind consciousness. I'll probably use consciousness. I think is more appropriate for the way we're approaching it. Is that it's the compilation of like all of the mental aspects that are at play in our lives, like all the perceptions, all of the processings, all of the things that, in kind of in a general sense, we would even think of as sort of our core perspective on things. And it takes into account all the information and all that. And during the history of philosophy, I mean, it's something that you necessarily have to discuss, because we're talking about sort of the point of perception in this reality for every human, for starters. Like, we'll just start with humans. So for every human, the mind consciousness, we'll just call it consciousness moving forward. So for every human, the consciousness is really the essence of the person that we're interacting with or considering when we talk about things philosophically, because the consciousness is the essence of the person. It's the focal point of all of the intakes of the vibrations, the energies, the frequencies, the information, energies and frequencies being everything. So the consciousness is the focal point, where if we look at the body itself, it's a holistic system. It's a system. And so if we look at the systemic nature of the body and the point at which all of the informations and awarenesses, anything you can imagine, come to a focal point, for us, whatever's inside of us, to interact with that collection of information from the reality itself and all the dimensions, in our ability to interact with that information in a palatable manner, or more to say, a manner which is interactable or accessible to us on the internal. And then it's also the point at which we decide that we can interact with the external world. That's consciousness. That's the point of consciousness that I'll be referring to when I discuss philosophically consciousness, or the conscious, right? And right now it's in terms of humans. So that point in which all the information comes in and we can interact with it, and then we can communicate out through it or express our perspectives, whatever they happen to be. That's consciousness. That's conscious on the base layer of just sort of a structural working view of it. Now, as far as the different gradations of consciousness, that's where, philosophers and theologians, scientists, like, we get into the weeds on it, right? So for starters, let's just like philosophically acknowledge that having consciousness is pretty amazing. And when looking at the human body, it may be even said that that's the whole point of the human body, is to act as a sort of mechanism or antenna for, in order just to serve the consciousness, really, to serve the person's consciousness, their conscience. or yeah, to serve their consciousness. Because it doesn't matter if a person, it doesn't matter the state of their body, young, old, healthy, not healthy, fully able, not fully able, doesn't matter. The consciousness is the paramount thing in the human experience. The distilled information resulting in an interactable, understandable perception of the reality and its attendant tributaries that stretch out through all the dimensions, and they can stretch all the way back to the light, or they can stretch all the way to the void, however you want to look at it. But the human body gives the ability to do a full spectrum inquiry into any aspect of reality. And the product is information that can go to our consciousness, or you can call it mind. Now, the nature of that information, if we go back into the other, fundamentals of philosophy, all the ways we can constitute ourselves and set our value systems and our morals and ethics and analytical portions of our brain and of our emotional interactions with the reality, and all the different ways that we can constitute ourselves, both in an aware manner or in an unaware manner. Everything, it all comes to a head when that process distills all the vibrations, energies, and frequencies into sort of serving it ready for our consciousness to interact with. And I would say, that's really who we end up identifying ourselves with. If we have an inner identity, it's whatever our internal interaction is with that information delivery point that's internal to us, that we call our our consciousness. It's the level at which we're aware that we're in the reality, and that we have developed a conscious relationship with the reality. And that relationship is through this information flow. And the information flow is a full spectrum information flow consisting of thoughts and emotions on all realms, all dimensions. The level of our understanding of which dimensions exist and which ones we're interacting with and which ones we have the abilities to interact with, it's irrelevant in terms of the fact that our consciousness is on some level aware of everything. And that's reported back through all the practitioners of different levels of meditation, transcendental meditation for sure, but through all walks of life, through various means, people have accessed fuller spectrum information and vibrations in the reality. And when they do, they come back and say, well, I got there in my conscious state, but apparently my consciousness always dwells there. And that's what pretty much any high level practitioner of spiritual awareness across the globe, across time, doesn't matter, they always come back and say that. Just, yeah, when you can get outside of the physical 3D external self and you get into the higher levels of consciousness of self, then you find that the higher levels of consciousness of self are always dwelling in a essentially unrestricted space. They have access to all this other information, access to all these other experiences, just essentially total access. And that the human body, when you look at it from that perspective, is an instrument to help focus and concentrate the informations and energies that the particular consciousness is experiencing. Now, of course, I'm attributing that function to it, but it seems to be a deducible function. It seems like deductive reasoning seems to be like on the side of, well, yeah, that seems to be the case. If we have reports now that the consciousness is a real thing, which it is, it stands to reason that one of the reasons the formation of a body occurs is to give the consciousness a place to have a point of physical matter being to be in the reality, so they can have, so consciousness can have fun. Yeah, I guess could have a place to play. You know, it's no good to have an instrument if you can't play it. So the body, in a way, seems to be the instrument of the consciousness, which I know is at odds with the way we're raised, because we're more philosophically, you know, we're more in the body first, and the other out of the body stuff seems to be speculative. But in this case, it's kind of the opposite. The consciousness seems to be the more eternal portion of us, and the body is obviously the temporal one. And I think, you know, physics, when science gets the ability to calibrate it and stuff, they'll be obvious that the astral energetic portion of self is immutable and eternal, and that the body is the hilariously, you know, short times joke. So conscious, right? So the consciousness is this. It's the distillation of all the information that we're experiencing, thoughts and emotions, into that internal realm. It goes beyond mental. It goes beyond whatever. We typically use our brains and other functions to access it and to feel that we're in with it. But as one gets more sublimated into it, you can tell it's not a purely mental plane. You can tell it's a plane, it's a astral plane, it's a spiritual plane, it's a quantum field. There's a lot of different ways to describe it, but it's clear that it transcends the bounds of the physical existence, and that calculations and permutations and analytics and all these other functions that we do in our brain, our physical brain, that we train our brain to do, all these deeply educated people trying to figure out high level mathematics or physics or philosophy or anything, you know, that's teaching our physical brain to do certain functions and to understand. And then it's clear that when we get outside of our brain, that the mind, the consciousness, is capable of doing much faster, much more complicated functions that appear to be similar to the ones that our brains do, but they occur in a different manner. And they also seem to start to connect to a much larger network of energies and intelligences in life. Now, I call that network the infinite intelligence. Some people call it God. Some people call it universal frequency. You know, some people just call it life. You can call it whatever you want. It's really semantics at that point. But moving forward, since we're in a world that's dealing with artificial intelligence, I'll call it infinite intelligence. And I personally believe that, or I've seen that, when a person goes through the process of self-awareness and they become more and more aware, it ultimately ends up being a process of repairing self to be able to connect. Like, once a person understands what their consciousness is and they have a decent handle on it, that prepares them for the next connection. And the connection is, okay, now that you have your consciousness semi, you know, understood, and you got decent navigation on it, now you're eligible to plug into the consciousness of life itself. Like, life itself is an intricate, infinite, eternal web of energy and vibration, filled with, you know, just eternal and infinite information. So it's infinite intelligence. And when one is prepared their consciousness to tap into that, it's almost like getting a Wi-Fi password. You almost get the universal Wi-Fi password. And then you can, since you understand the nature of yourself and how your consciousness is constituted, you can have some small working principles of the ideas of how infinite intelligence works, and that makes you eligible to be able to connect into it. Now, going back to sort of the individual idea of consciousness, and exploring a little more, it's interesting that consciousness seems to be a thing that, the more an individual becomes aware of it, the more it kicks in, the more it materializes, the more it becomes real. And that awareness of it is a fundamental operating switch that makes it more. So in the beginning, we can go, oh, I think, and then you go, yeah, I think, therefore I am. That's the classic one from Descartes. Go, oh, I think, therefore I am. Oh, I'm in charge of this ship. The ship being myself. Like, oh, okay, cool. I can think, right? And that's like the basic. And then you get going and you realize that you can program your own brain, and your brain's like a starter set, and you get discipline, and you start to see high correlations between doing things with your brain and results in the reality. And it kind of cycles up, and you start to get confident that, yes, I'm in charge of my brain, and I can do this and I can do that, and I can get these results. And then it starts to get to something bigger. And at some point, it's different for everybody. But at some point, the sum of the parts becomes greater than the whole in that process. And in that process, when that happens, then you know, like, you're becoming aware of your consciousness, and you're becoming conscious. And in that sense, it really kicks in that life becomes a series of focusing on things that are conscious, like bringing the unconscious into the conscious. And in order, and we'll get into that in another video, but in order to bring the unconscious into the conscious, it's exceptionally helpful to have a working relationship with your consciousness, your mind, in the fuller sense, not just your brain. And I've seen a lot of people in life that get tripped out because they try to rely on their brain, and your brain can only take you so far, no matter how smart you are. It's like if you could have 1,000 horsepower car, but if you only have 3 gears, you're going to blow the engine out. So in this case, the brain is a limiting factor. You need to go into the mind. You need to go into the consciousness in order to get to the bigger stages of thought, the bigger stages of data, deeper relationship with life itself. It will inform you in ways that you couldn't possibly comprehend, ways that I couldn't possibly comprehend. But it requires this process of becoming self-aware of mind, of consciousness, and then realizing that that's really going to help you shine a light on things that go from the unconscious to the conscious. And that's the transition. And when life senses that, then a flow can occur, a stream can occur of a mix of, okay, this is your like known conscious reality, and then life will start streaming in like things from the unconscious to bring to your attention when it senses that you can do that. Because at these higher levels of consciousness, you start interacting with other levels of consciousness, and consciousness is not restricted to human existence, like, far from it. We just have a test vehicle in order to boot up and get into it and go, oh, hey, I'm aware of being conscious. Like, yes, new level unlocked, and then it goes again. And then that introduces you to other levels of consciousness. Now, consciousness is essentially it's a collection of energies and frequencies and awareness within a system. And the system can be anything. It can be a molecule, it can be a dog, it can be a plant, it can be a collectivist, it's free flowing, it's amorphous. It can be a flock of birds flying together. It can be a nebula in some quadrant of the galaxy. It can be literally anything that has this energy connection going together that becomes aware of itself, that then can process things as an energetic unit, as a consciousness together. And these things, they overlap, and they interlattice, and they go from big to small, and they go from one dimension to all the dimensions. And ultimately, the best way to describe the universe itself, where all of the of the life-giving portions of the universe, any place where there's energy flowing through it. I mean, the simplest way might just to be describe it is that it's just consciousness. that everything is consciousness, and then you could furthermore speculate that that's the whole purpose for the universe. Like the whole purpose of creation is to create these structures and these information flows with the idea that how a garden grows food, that the universe grows consciousness. And in that sense, as a human, we're getting training wheels. We get our own little body, and we get our own little brain, and we get a chance to boot it up and try it out. And if we're good at it, we can plug into the bigger picture. Which is why in my sort of philosophy, it's okay to get to denote like the finer points and the minor stuff and the minutia, but don't stay down there for too long, because the big picture, like life is short, it's deep, but it's short. But in the bigger picture, it's good to understand that the human body is really a micro of the macro, and that when we do these internal philosophical inquiries and we do these deep dives into ourself, our internal processes, and we try to figure out how we're constituted and like what's this and what's that, what's consciousness, what's mind, like how does this work, how do I become aware, that overall we're learning the mechanisms of creation itself, of the macro. So in that sense, the consciousness that we're engaged in generating in ourself and constituting, to which nobody has like a clearly defined answer. Nobody in history has like a rock solid answer on it. Everybody's got essentially theories that get really close to the point. But as we develop these consciousnesses within our bodies, they seem to be in preparation to connect to the much larger picture. And if we take that sort of evolutionary trajectory and we put it in comparison to other evolutionary trajectories of things that we see on Earth, of let's say lesser degrees of heightened stakes like survival or this or that, it seems as though life has a trajectory of growth that is triggered through self-awareness, because it seems as though all the evolutionary steps are triggered by self-awareness of what the experience is. And it doesn't have to always be high-level philosophical stuff. It can be, beavers become aware that I know that when I see a stream, I like to dam it up. Okay, cool. Well, now you're a beaver, right? Or like whatever it is. Like, oh, I'm a lion. I like to like roam around and dispense like justice and eat and keep my pride cool. Like, okay, cool. Well, now you're a lion. Like when so maybe as a human being, I go, oh, I like to develop my consciousness and connect to the universe. Like, oh, okay, cool. Now you're a human being. And that seems consistent throughout all the different dimensions. That seems consistent throughout all the different forms of life. Whether you think, a molecule like the consciousness molecule, has a conscience, or you think that like only human beings or whatever, but the full spectrum has it. And the more we accept it, and the more we can grow with it, and the more we can tap into it, I think the richer, more enjoyable, and more fulfilling life is, because it seems as though that's sort of the intention and design of our evolutionary trajectory, is to boot up, develop our individual consciousnesses, become aware of it, and then connect to the universe at large, which also seems to be a system of consciousnesses. Well, I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for spending some time here at Philosopher's Corner. I hope you have a good day.